What is the secret heart of violence? Well, it's morality, it's justice, and it's power. And you can do violence in beautiful and honorable ways, and you can do it in ways that are absolutely fracked up, which is much of the violence that each of us has seen and experienced, sadly. Hello and welcome. I'm Carla McLaren. This is episode 14 of season 2 of the Off Ramp Project. I wanted to talk about violence almost right away in season 1, but I knew that I had to work my way up to it. And now it is episode 14 in season 2. So we're now at episode 30. We had 16 in the first season and 14 now. It took me 30 episodes to get here, but I've been leaving little crumbs along the way for myself to be able to talk about what we've looked at so far in regard to violence. Now, I want to tell you first that I am a fan of violence. And I wanted to write a book called A Form of Violence That's Not Fracked Up. I'm not going to swear because it does things to the algorithm, and also many people don't enjoy swearing as much as I do. But you know what I mean by fracked up, right? I wanted to write about the kinds of violence that I've seen that are honorable, that are people have agreed to it, there's consent involved, and there's a kind of a ritual or a ceremony that goes on such that the violence doesn't get out of hand. I was a wildly active kid. I did kickboxing and archery and fencing, and whatever was violent on any team, that was the place that I would be. I was the fullback in soccer. I stood at the back, and when people came for the goal, I was in front of the goalie defending. So I really enjoy ritualized forms of violence. Racquetball was an amazing sport for me. Like tennis is boring. You just stand there for a long time, but racquetball, you just running and hitting. One of my favorite games when I was young was Red Rover. I don't know if you played it, but you would hold hands with your friends. You'd say, Red Rover, send Dennis right over. And Dennis would try to break through the arms. And people wouldn't call me over because I would break through everything. I was like, let me at him. Right? So I grew up with an understanding of and an interest in and a care for violence. But each of those forms of violence that I talked about, fencing and soccer and Red Rover, and each of them has rules. Everybody agrees to be playing. They have protections within, like with soccer, you're wearing shin guards, and some people wear eye guards, right? In fencing, it's a tremendous amount of protection. You've got the whole face guard, you've got the outfit, you're using oftentimes unsharpened or called épées. The épées often have like rounded red tips, so that even if you get a strike, you're not going to go through the person's. There's probably a French name for the thing you wear, right? I can't remember it, but you're not going to draw blood, right? But you are showing your skill as a sports person, rather than just your out of control violence. Now, violence that is fracked up would be the opposite of that. There's no rules, there's no boundaries, there's no consent. There's no ceremony, there's no ritual, there's no container. When I am suited up to, on guard and go for it, or when I am suited up for kickboxing, the person across from me is also suited up, or they're in the ring, or they've decided to do it. They've worked out, they've planned for the violence. And then we can work with each other and against each other and show our skills and our preparation and our intelligence and our wiliness, right? It's delightful. It's delightful. Yeah, you get hurt, but for a purpose. But when those rules and boundaries and guidelines do not exist, violence is just cruelty. It's cruelty, and it's a sign that you, as the violent person, have no honor. right? You've got no boundaries, you've got no rules. Your opponent didn't agree to be there. Your opponent has no preparation, right? So if you win in that fight, you're a punk, right? Because that wasn't a fair fight. So violence that doesn't have those boundaries and structures around it is fracked up. And the kind of violence I've been talking about throughout this whole off-ramp project, we want to take an off-ramp from fracked up violence. And if we want to get into conflict with people, we want to do it with agreements, with rules, with boundaries, with ceremony, with ritual. We want to be able to do it in such a way that if anybody gets hurt, they knew it was a possibility. Yeah, that's the only kind of violence I want to see. And if it's there, I'm going to go do it. I'm going to go get it. Like, let me go. I want to do this. Yeah. But for most people, we haven't been able to articulate or see violence in that way. We've only seen fracked up violence with dishonorable people who, even if they win, are losers. Yeah. I learned about a book that one of my professors was writing. I was in my bachelor's degree program as an adult, and I was bored out of my mind. And I went to my sociology professors and said, is there anything you're working on where you need a good writer, or you need someone to talk to, or you need someone to do research? I want to learn research. I want to do this. And my professor, Tony Waters, said, I'm working on a book about murder. When is it murder and when is it killing? And I was like, that's a ridiculous question. It's always murder. He said, what about war? And he gave me a bunch of what about this? What about that? And I was like, I'm in. So together we wrote this book, When Killing is a Crime. It's by Tony Waters. I was his research assistant. And I talked to many of the people that whose theories he was working on. And I did all of the graphs and explanatory parts of the back of the book, the appendix or the appendices. I had a great time. I learned so much. And one of the most powerful theorists that I and Tony found was Donald Black. He's the late, great Donald Black was a proponent of what he called pure sociology. And what he meant by that was sociology, which looks at social structure, not at individuals. That's psychology. And in pure sociology, you look at violence as a social issue, not an individual issue. And sadly, almost all of the theorists of violence and crime are doing it from a psychological point of view, which Tony and I called the bad man theory. Right? The bad man theory is that there's some bad people doing some bad things, and you need to put them in prison and get the badness out of them. Now, we know from hundreds of years that prison doesn't work, that prison is a ridiculous idea. And it's a waste of everybody's time and energy and money and life. And it's a cruel, and it's a form of violence that's fracked up, right? So punishment only works for a minute, and then it becomes fracked up violence. And it comes from this psychological bad man theory. In Don Black's theory, what he's looking at is the conditions under which violence will happen. And we're looking at violence as, he says, all violence begins as a disagreement or a squabble about something that goes against the moral agreements or understanding of the person who is heading toward violence. And violence is a harsh word, shunning, pushing, punching. It goes from the harsh words or shunning all the way up into lethal violence. It goes all the way up into killing and murder, right? But it begins as a disagreement over, did you take my bike? Or did you sleep with my loved one? Or did you hurt my friend? Or did you hit my car? Or did you challenge my Jell-O salad at the picnic, right? We've all been in family squabbles where that happened. But what Black and the Blackians, there's a group of sociologists who are working still in Black's concept. says that it is a self-help form of justice, and it is a self-help form of morality. And the self-help means that there's nobody else to help you. And what Black and the Blackians have found is that third parties who are trusted will reliably reduce violence so that it can stay at the level of a sharp word or shunning. And it can be worked on at that level through, for instance, restorative justice or mediation, or something called transformative justice, which is looking at changing the conditions under which the violence is happening, right? So with effective third parties, you will regularly and reliably see less violence. And so what that means is that when people are moved to violence within their communities or families, it's not the bad man that's the problem, or the bad woman, or the bad child. It is that the structures that would reduce violence do not exist there. The elders are gone. The police are untrustworthy. The justice system is not accessible, or it's also untrustworthy. The people who could cool the thing down are gone. And so violence will erupt in places where there are no reliable and respected third parties. And I was really fascinated by this because I knew that prison didn't work. I knew that the way that we do punishment, crime and punishment, is just amazingly fracked up. It has no value. And I've worked in prisons, and I've been with the men in maximum security prisons and lifers, and I've done work there, and I just looked around and went, oh my gosh, so much human suffering. And these people are removed from community, and they have so much to offer, even if they really screwed up on their way here. But I saw so much in prison, and I was so glad to work with Tony on this book. One of the things that the Blackians say is that most violence, and actually other criminologists as well, most violence that is obvious, punching, hitting, stealing, shooting, knifing, killing, exists at the bottom of hierarchies of human worth. Oh, I'm coming back to hierarchies of human worth. And we know, when I talked about the pyramidal structure of a hierarchy of human worth, that the people at the bottom have to develop extreme hyper empathy because they have to be aware of everyone above them. When you get to the top of a hierarchy of human worth, you may have lost your empathy because your empathy inputs are so small. You're in this rarefied top of the mountain world, and you don't always lose your empathy, but it's pretty much it's a danger there. And people at the bottom of hierarchies of human worth don't always develop hyperempathy, but it's smart if they do, right? They have to be more aware of everything than the people at the top can even think about being. So we'll see more violence at the bottom of hierarchies of human worth, of race, of wealth, of religiosity. We will see more violence at the bottom of income, right? We see more violence at the bottom of hierarchies of human worth. We also see more despair, right? But when you're at the bottom and you're crushed by these layers on top of you, who are the respected third parties, right? If you go into an inner city of any kind, you will see people who have they don't have access to justice. And so there's a rough kind of communal morality that comes up. And when there aren't elders, when there aren't peacemakers, when there aren't trusted third parties, the beefs about disagreements or squabbles often rise very quickly to physical violence. They go from, words, shunning, hitting, knifing, you're dead, right? They go very fast because there's no one there to cool it down. And I don't know if you saw this. This was in the news a number of years ago. I think it was at a game preserve in Africa. And the game wardens came out and they found a rhinoceros who wasn't just poached. The rhinoceros was torn apart. And they couldn't believe what they were seeing. It was like, who would do this? It's ridiculous. Nobody took the horn. Nobody took any, part that you could sell on the black market. And they put cameras up and took a watch of what the heck was going on in the park. And what they found was it was a group of adolescent male elephants, and they were marauding together through the park and tearing up any animal who was unlucky enough to get in their way. These elephants were out of control, and it was a group of male teenage elephants. And what they realized is that they had moved the elephants from another place where they were endangered. And they thought, be in the park, be lovely. But they were in what's called their must. They were in their, high testosterone time. And there were no reliable third parties. There were no elder elephants there. So what they did was they quickly went and got some elder elephants. And that nonsense stopped pretty much right away, because the elders were third parties that the wild, out of control elephants, teenage elephants could look up to. And it stopped the murders. It stopped the marauding. Just the presence of an elder elephant stopped the violence. And we are not that different from elephants, right? Most of the violence that occurs with males. Females do more relational kind of violence, unethical, unempathic gossip. Females tend not to do physical violence, but they do a lot of relational violence when they're young. But it's basically teens from about 16 to about 24 to 26. It's males. And so we've got a bunch of out of control male elephants without reliable third parties to soothe them and cool them down and be like, you're going to grow out of this, pal. You don't need to do it. It's something that we've known forever, that people at the bottom of hierarchies of human worth are more prone to violence, and that males between about 16 and 26 or 15 to 24, depends on the area, are more prone to violence. Now, this doesn't mean that's the only violence that happens. There's something called elite violence. And so it would be people up at the top of the hierarchies of human worth, and their violence tends to be structural. They create structures that are in and of themselves violent. And back in the day when we were all studying DEI and figuring out what happened that George Floyd could be murdered in the streets and people were Sandra and everybody, it was such a horrible awakening for many of us to say, how did this get so bad? I'm not racist, right? Everybody's like, I'm not racist. How does racism happen? And what we began to understand is that racism is structural. And you and I could be racist, right? You and I could be racist, but we don't have to be, because the structure is. Our banking laws, our real estate, our incarceration, our medical care, it's all racially biased. And almost everything you can look at is racially biased. And a lot of people couldn't handle that. And so they went into, I'm not racist, and we need to cancel DEI. We need to cancel anything that's going to tell us that we've created systems that are violent and racist in and of themselves. But that's elite violence, right? It's in the structure. So we've been looking at structures. We've been looking at the ways that we've all been primed for violence. And taking an off-ramp means understanding what happened to us. When we looked at cults in season 1, and I've talked about them for the rest of the time, a cult is a violent social structure. When we look at abusive relationships, an abusive relationship is a violent social structure. And cults do a very good job at making monsters out of everyone outside, so nobody in the cult has an effective third party to go to, right? So the structure retains its violence, right? I've been in an abusive marriage, and part of it is isolating the person. And I was isolated from my family and friends, so there were no effective third parties for me either, right? Now, my husband and cult leaders do this because they have probably not seen effective third parties, and the violence that wants to come out of them could have been moderated by effective third parties in their lives, but it didn't happen that way. So when I talk about violence, know that it's a normal human behavior to want justice and to have morality and to want to have honor, to want to be seen as a respectable and respected person. That is normal. When that doesn't happen, and we don't have respected and reliable third parties, that self-help movement toward justice, that self-help movement toward morality may fly off the handle. And that's violence. And what we find in working with people who are violent is you don't do violence back at them because they are already in a situation where they have been disrespected and their answer was violence. If you do violence to them, you are disrespecting them further. And whether they agree with you in the moment or not, or pretend to be chaste and I'm feeling bad about myself and I won't do that again, you have taught them not only nothing, but you've thrown them even further backward, because you've shown them, if you are the justice system, that you are not reliable. You are not a third party they can turn to. And so when we talk about recidivism, when people come out of prison and they just go and they reoffend, it's because they never learned a gosh darn thing about how violence works, what they were trying to do, and how they could have done it differently, right? When I talk about your emotions are not for sale, your empathy is not for sale, that is a violence protection tactic of mine. Because if people can get into your emotional system and jack into you and actually start to own some of your emotions, that's violence, right? And your emotions exist as reliable third parties in your life if you know how to work with them. Shame especially is one of your most reliable third parties within yourself. And if people have got your emotions, if they've got your panic and your hatred and your rage and your anxiety and your jealousy and your envy, right? They own parts of your brain and they parts of your intelligence and parts of your humanity. And you are not going to be able to function very well. And we see it everywhere in people who are, I hate everybody on the right and I hate everybody on the left and I hate this and women are this and Haitians are this. When people can buy your emotions, they control you. And when you're controlled, you're more prone to violence. When your empathy is for sale and you can be told and manipulated into the idea that all Republicans are evil or all liberals are evil or all feminists are evil or multiculturalism is an evil and it always turns to violence. Well, I'm like, well, where's the reliable third parties? Just get some. If you've got a multicultural situation, understand what violence is and go get some reliable third parties. Get some restorative justice in there. Get some mediation in there. Get some elders in there. Bring in the elephants, right? Know what you're doing. Don't just say, oh, humans are not functional. They are functional. You just have to understand what function is and stop looking at psychology, for God's sakes. It's not a bad man. It's a bad structure. The reason I talk about this now is there's a way that our friend Donald John Trump incites violence. One, he says that you can't trust anybody but him. And if people don't have access to him, then there's no trusted third parties, right? You can't trust DEI. You can't trust the media. You can't trust, and media is called the fourth estate because it exists to moderate the problems of the three forms of government, right? The three branches of government. The fourth estate is like the ring around a kickboxing, right? The fourth estate is the rules, it's the boundaries. And so Trump saying that you can't trust them, or that you have to go to Fox News or other, extreme, like MSNBC on the left, really extremely partisan news sources. You are telling people that there are no effective third parties, and you're increasing the likelihood of violence. Yeah. And that violence is everywhere. We see it. The working of ICE, the working of the police. There are people there. I'm seeing so many young male elephants who don't have an effective third party anywhere. And we can say you're an ICE officer and you're a bad person, right? You can say you're a police officer and you're a bad person, but that's the bad man theory. What I'm saying is the structure is bad, and we can change the structure. We know how to do it. It's in the social sciences, right? Donald Black figured it out. And I got to talk to Mark Cooney, who is a Blackian. He has worked with Donald Black. He's still alive. He's down in Georgia. And he did a book called Warriors and Peacemakers, How Third Parties Shape Violence. You need to read it. You need to read it. And perhaps get some training in restorative justice or mediation or transformative justice, which is something that Fania Davis is doing. She's here in California. She's in Oakland. Transformative justice looks at transforming what it was that caused the problem that led to the transformative justice people needing to come in. So it's not just, you and Dave got into a beef. It's what happened with the structure. Really, they're looking at this in a sociological way rather than a psychological way, thank goodness. What I wanted to talk about as well is violence is a way to regain your sense of self, your sense of power, your sense of morality and justice. And we talked, and I think it was, episode 11 in season 2. It was called It's All About Power. And I talked about the different kinds of power that you can have. And let's look at this in regard to violence. There's authority, and this is from the Power Manual by Cyndi Suarez, and she lists 5 types of power. There's authority, which is command and leadership that is recognized by you and others, which means you don't need a third party because everybody's chill. Everybody understands you and you understand them, and you've got authority and you don't need to do much. Influence is the ability to create change without threats or force. So if you have influence, then you basically are a reliable third party. Even in your own, conflicts, if you can say, hey, I think it's getting heated right now about what happened to your car, and I apologize, but what needs to happen to make this right for you, right? You can have influence and have the power of moving into conflict resolution rather than moving into conflict that's going to blow up. Now we're working with some power that's getting a little fracked up. Coercion, the ability to pressure others to change, right? If you're pressuring them, if you're pushing them, there are it's kind of an injustice that you're doing, coercion. So that would be, we're moving into the violence form of power. Then there's manipulation, which is the ability to create one-sided change that only benefits you, right? So you are not a reliable third party. You're an enemy because you're trying to get me to do something that's only for you. No, you and I are going to have words, and then there might be punching and there might be kicking, right? And I'll shun you, and right, it's going to keep going if we don't have anybody around to step in to this conflict. And then the 5th kind, which is definitely violent, is force, the ability to enforce change through threats and the removal of choice. So in power, which we all want power over ourselves, it's important to understand what kind of power we want and what kind of power we want to use. My friend Emma Vanderclift is an educator. I met her in the autism community. I did my master's thesis on autism social skills training programs, and too long didn't read. Spoilers, they're terrible. And autistic people generally hate them. So if you have an autistic social skills training program, you may want to look at my thesis. I'll put it in the show notes. Emma is an educator who studied de-escalation in hostage negotiations, right? And her book is called Talk to Me, What Educators and Others Can Learn About De-Escalation from Hostage Negotiators. Now, a hostage negotiator is coming into an extremely violent situation. The person has taken a hostage and probably has weapons and probably has a plan. It could be a homicidal or a suicidal plan if they don't get what they want, right? And you would think, let's bring in the SWAT team. That would not be a good idea. You need to bring in the hostage negotiator, and what they do is empathy. What they do is ask the person, what was the disagreement, or as Donald Black says, the squabble? What form of justice are you looking for? What morality has been broken such that you feel the need to do this? And, you know, I would also be thinking, but I wouldn't ask it. Where are the reliable third parties in your life? Clearly, they're not there. So we've got a person who's at the end of their rope. And instead of sending in SWAT teams to use violence, they send in hostage negotiators who do everything they can to understand what got the person here. And it works. It works because this person is probably at the bottom of a hierarchy of human worth, right? They are at the bottom of their ability to cope. They have lost all perspective. They have no reliable third parties. The structure around them has failed them. And all they have left is this form of desperate violence or the threat of desperate violence. And the hostage negotiators go into this on fire situation. It is on fire. And they cool it down and they act as reliable third parties. They act as elders, they act as peacemakers, and it works. And so Talk to Me. I think this is a wonderful book. I also want to talk about a related thing, and I didn't even know this before I studied murder. People who study murder also track suicide because they're both lethal violence. Murder, you're murdering someone else. Suicide, you're murdering yourself, or you're trying to. And what was fascinating to me is that suicide is almost always double the rate of homicide. So if homicide is at 5 deaths per 100,000 people, suicide is 10 deaths per 100,000 people. And that almost always tracks. Lethal violence toward yourself, you're twice as likely to kill yourself as kill anyone else, right? You're twice as likely to kill yourself as to be killed. So we don't really look at suicide as lethal violence, as kind of a final solution when everything has fallen apart. Your health, your mental health, your monetary situation, your relationships, your family, your social structures, social services, the law, everything has fallen apart. And it's a kind of a self-help out of hell. And when you call a suicide hotline, they don't say, oh, life is wonderful and it's beautiful, because clearly it's not. What they do is, like a hostage negotiator, like a reliable third party, like an elder and a peacemaker, they ask you, how did it get here? Talk to me about what the pain is. Talk to me about what has gone wrong. And as people do that and they unload, this urge to suicide usually will abate, right? Because the suicide sort of came up to say, this is unlivable, friend. This is unlivable. And a lot of us don't have anyone to talk to at all when we get there. And sadly, we end our lives instead of ending the situations that brought us to the time of calling the suicide hotline. So violence is a problem if you don't know how to use it, if you don't understand how it works, if you don't understand how to interrupt it. But violence is a natural and necessary part of human life. And it's something we need to plan for. It's something we need to create structures about. It's something we need to be less pig ignorant about. Our crime and punishment is extreme and extremely ignorant, and it is violent in and of itself. Putting people who have a problem with violence because they have no effective third party into a violent social structure where the third parties, the guards, and all the people who work at the prison are not trustworthy to the prisoners, are not elders, are not peacemakers, are not elder elephants. They are people with guns and lots of other weapons who would not believe you if you told them what was happening to them, right? So we create more violence. Now, one of the problems here in the United States is prison is now a for-profit industry. And because of the 13th Amendment, prisoners don't have rights, and they can be worked for essentially slave labor, perhaps making $1 an hour. This is legal here in the United States. So this idea of removing the failed and violence producing and despair producing and literally fatal world of prison here in the United States probably won't happen because too many people at the top of unempathic hierarchies of human worth are making lots of money off of it. So stay out of prison, guys. You can't sometimes, you can't. But we're in such a troubling time. And yet social scientists have been studying this trouble for 100 years or more. And we've got answers, and we've got ways to moderate human violence. We've got ways to take off ramps from unhealthy groups and unhealthy relationships and abusive situations. We have ways to get out. And hopefully, when there are enough of us who've learned how to get out, we will also be able to learn how to make sure that people don't get into them in the first place, or not as many people. This is my quest to follow that star, no matter how hopeless. But better this than filling people with rage and hopelessness. I saw someone earlier this week. I don't watch television, and I don't watch talking head shows, but someone had done a clip of Megyn Kelly having just an absolute spittle coming out of her mouth rant about people from Haiti. And I watched it with the sound off, right? So I could read the emotions. And what I saw in her, she's at the top of so many hierarchies of human worth, it's not even funny. She's at the top of the beauty one, she's top of money one, she's top of access one, she's top of whiteness, right? There's probably a whole bunch more. And she's lost her empathy. Her empathy has been damaged as it is throughout all hierarchies of human worth. And what I saw her rolling off of her as she was screaming about Haitians should go back to Haiti because this is America and we built it, and just all kinds of nonsense, really ungenerous. I saw despair, hatred, which means she's lost her boundaries, despair, which means she's trapped in a grief and sadness that she cannot move, panic, that she's feeling like her life is threatened, anxiety, that is a part of panic, jealousy and envy that have gone toxic in her. I see her suffering horrendously. I don't hate her. I am seriously worried about her because of her vitriol and the violence that's coming out of her. But I see that in her social position, where she's been told and she's telling others that whiteness is in danger because there's dark people, and the American way of life and our culture is in danger. I was like, what's American culture? Peanut butter and jelly in the same jar, classical music. Okay, that's not going to go anywhere. We're not losing that. because we have people from Haiti and Italy and Ireland and Mexico and El Salvador and San Salvador and Uruguay and Paraguay, and we don't lose anything. The idea that we lose things, it's coming from a place of unbelievable weakness. It's violence that's fracked up. It's violence that has no elders. It has no peacemakers. It has a desperation for a morality that is in and of itself violent. It has a desperation for justice that is actually punishment, right? It's not something that comes out of healthy and well-balanced and emotionally well-regulated people. If being at the top of a hierarchy of human worth was worth anything, then the people like Megyn Kelly and Donald John Trump and all of the people who went to Jeffrey Epstein's island to abuse children, they wouldn't have needed to do any of that. They'd be happy. They'd be healthy. They'd be frolicking. They'd be doing beautiful things. They wouldn't be taking money and making giant penis-shaped, is penis a swear word? No, it's just regular. Penis-shaped rockets to go to Mars because they want to get away from the Earth. I'm like, the Earth is awesome. Go to Mars. Get out. Don't let the door hit you in the butt when you leave, right? But the wild excesses of the people at the top of the hierarchies of human worth right now should tell us something, which is hierarchies of human worth are worthless. They are violent structures that need effective third parties on the outside of them. And if you're trapped in any of them, let's talk about taking an off-ramp. That's what we've been talking about for all of these episodes, is how to get out when humans screw up as hard as we've screwed up. We are wonderful, brilliant, terrifying, unbelievably ignorant, unbelievably beautiful species, and we don't have to fall backward into fracked up forms of violence to get things done. We can do what hostage negotiators do and try to hear the deeper story. In, what was it? Episode 12, we looked at the deeper story from the beautiful sociologist Arlie Russell Hochschild. There are ways out of this. Yes, it's terrible. Yes, it's violent. Yes, it's ridiculous. Yes, it's terrifying. Yes, it's filled us all with grief or rage or despair or hatred or shame or whatever. And these emotions are here to help us. They're here to help us figure it out. And the social sciences, not psychology, okay, sociology and anthropology, and sometimes economics. But the social sciences, these things have been studied. Murder has been studied. Cruelty has been studied. Child molestation has been studied. Abuse has been studied. Everything's been studied, and we have answers. We just have to get to them. And we have to be willing to see a world that is built on a better structure. And so that our violence can be delightful, and we can turn on, whatever kind of the World Cup, right? And watch the fullbacks. They're the violent ones. That's me waving at you, right? They're intense, but everybody knows, right? Everybody knows when they get toward the fullbacks, they got to be careful, okay? Because that's a part of the rules. We can watch kickboxing. It's beautiful and, painful, but we know that both boxers are there with their own consent and with the consent of the other person. They've trained. There's rules. There's timers. There's outs. There's so much in violence that isn't fracked up that we love to see. And for me, I love to do it. Yeah. Violence isn't the problem. It's when violence is non-consensual, when it is without honor, without rules, without boundaries, without agreements. That is the violence of a loser, right? And we don't want to be losers, especially when violence is on the table. We want to be able to hear the deeper story, find the justice that was denied, find the morality that was overlooked, find the elders and the peacemakers who can support people in finding their justice and morality and the truth and equality. Because that is as much a part of humankind as violence is, right? They don't cancel each other out if you do it right. Okay, so go and look and see if there's any forms of violence that you actually enjoy. Like racket sports, they're very violent. You're like, "Duh!" They're very violent. Sports of any kind. See if there's any kind of violence. Do you like watching war movies? Do you like vampires? I like vampires, right? There's a way that we need to see violence in order to understand what's going on. And notice, is all the violence you watch fracked up? Or is it honorable? That's an important distinction to make. And I vote for honorable because the fracked up violence makes everybody a loser. And who wants to lose? I want to win, but only if you're having fun. Okay. Thank you, violent ones and peaceful ones. I'll see you next time.